Take part in today's agenda as we discuss the situation of foreign businesses and investments in the country. Send us some TLC, tweets, likes, and comments. Text us at 0939-369-9194 or connect with us on Facebook and Twitter at OneNewsPH and use the hashtag agenda on Signal TV.
A lawmaker and a foreign chamber official are joining us today. Let's get to know them.
Rufus Rodriguez is the representative of the 2nd District of Cagayan de Oro City. He had a stint as Vice Governor of Misamis Oriental in the 1980s. He later led the Bureau of Immigration under the Estrada administration. Back in 1990, Rodriguez became the youngest dean of the San Beda College of Law. John Forbes is Senior Advisor at the American Chamber of Commerce, Philippines. He is also Senior Counselor at Bryans and Partners, Southeast Asia's leading government affairs consultancy. Prior to that, he was President of Forbes and Associates. He was also a Foreign Service Officer at the U.S. Department of State, where he served for over 2 decades.
Welcome to the program, gentlemen, and forgive me for making you my professors this morning. Okay, Congressman Rodriguez, you're proposing economic cha-cha.
That's right.
Okay, now here's the problem with that. Every time we say economic cha-cha in this country, everybody gets antsy, goes crazy, and there's so much confusion. In my opening, I was saying, do we really need it? What is the point? Because, you know, Fidel Ramos opened up the doors when he dealt with, I think, WTO and stuff like that,
right.
and Asian countries. So we're kind of like wondering, are we just kind of aligning everything? Is that the purpose, or is this something new?
This will be something new because in our constitution, it's very peculiar. Because in most Asian countries, China and also in Korea, there are really no fixed limits of foreign investments in the Constitution itself. They are made by law.
You're referring to the 60-40?
The 60-40. I'm referring to our Constitution, which has about 8 provisions that limits foreign investments into 40%. Example, the franchise and for public utilities, public utility firms have 60-40. The maximum investment of foreign investments is 40%.
Yeah.
Same also with the development of natural resources, 40%. The lease of land, also about 40% also. Now for media, 100%. Filipino, no foreign investments. Okay. Educational institutions under our Constitution, 60-40, 40% foreign. And the advertising, 30% foreign. These are the limitations there. So there's no flexibility.
Okay.
So therefore, we're saying that I have a resolution for amendment of the Constitution that we put a comma in these restrictive provisions that limits foreign investments, to put a comma that will say, as may be provided by law, meaning Congress, upon proper determination, upon consultation with the sectors, and from NEDA and the other government agencies, will be able now to increase foreign investments. And you know why, Cito, we're doing that?
Why?
Because we believe that we have very low foreign investment. The figures will bear us out here. The ASEAN Secretariat has said that for 2018, we have Singapore with $62 billion.
Okay.
We have Indonesia, $24 billion. And Vietnam is $14 billion. The Philippines is from $9 to $10 billion only.
Okay.
So we would like to have more.
10 to be double digit, or at the most 10, but usually with single digit.
Yeah, with single digits for the past 10 years. So therefore, it's about time that we have a constitution which will allow already. Because the thing now globally is that there is already the drive of different countries to make their economies open, so that there'll be more foreign investments, providing more jobs and more income to the government.
Okay, John, just so you're clear, because you're the newbie on the set, this is a free for all. So just jump in. Now, but my question for John Forbes is, what's the response of the foreign chambers regarding the proposal of Congressman Rodriguez?
Can I say something before that?
Go
Since
ahead.
you let me jump in, Cito, and thank you very much for inviting me this morning. I think everybody here looks at it from the inside, but we look at it from the outside. And
Okay.
it's very important to look at how the Philippines is measured in terms of openness because of these restrictions in the 1987 Constitution. And there have been two measures. The World Bank did a study of cross-border investment by many countries back in 2012. And the Philippines was more restrictive in these areas than Vietnam, than Cambodia, than Malaysia, in our own neighborhood here.
More restrictive than Vietnam,
Cambodia
which
and Malaysia.
technically is a communist country.
Oh, it's very much a communist country.
Cambodia, I think, is a communist country, is it? Or
Well,
democratic?
no, it's only had one party since Hun Sen
Oh,
took
okay, yeah,
power
well,
30 years ago. It hasn't
monopoly.
changed its president. Well, at
Okay.
least Malaysia changed theirs, and then
Yeah.
he brought them back. But, but also, the OECD has a study of 67 developing countries, and the Philippines is the most restrictive, and it's 4 times as restrictive as the OECD average of developed countries. So this is how the country is looked at, simply because of the restrictions in the Constitution. The Foreign Investment Act was very progressive when it was passed right at the end of Cory, the beginning of the Ramos administration,
Yeah.
because it opened up domestic market, right? Export industries always have been open to foreign investment. We've had a flood into the electronics sector, the garment sector, and of course into the BPO, the services sector. There's also a factor of the FTAs the regional agreements the Philippines has entered into, including the ASEAN Economic Community, where there's a commitment there to open up different sectors. And the Philippines has always said, well, we can't open up these sectors because they're in our Constitution. So if you look at overall FDI coming into Southeast Asia, actually it's as much as China gets. It's about $140 billion a year. But the Philippines, with 16% of the population of ASEAN, is only getting 8% of the FDI. So it's quite clear that in these areas, if they're opened up, if they're dealt with by laws in the future, which is the other restrictions, are dealt by laws, and they're being changed. So it's trying to put it on a level playing field, and that's point number 3 of the social economic agenda of President Duterte, is to open these areas up.
Okay, I don't want to light up a firecracker this early in the program, but Congressman Rodriguez, Rufus, back in high school, we were told that, the economic provisions of the 1935 Constitution was to protect business interests, particularly American business interests, they said back then. And times have changed, things have changed. Am I correct in my suspicion that the recent versions of the Constitution were actually written to protect local monopolies?
Yes, correct. The Constitution is very clear. It also states there that the state shall have a self-reliant and independent economy effectively controlled by Filipinos.
Okay.
That is why when I proposed that we have a provision in the Constitution that all these restrictions will be subject to law, that the legislature can either increase it or the foreign investments or decrease it, whatever is the sense of the of Congress. Precisely the MAP, the Management Association of the Philippines, first they said they are in favor of having of lifting these restrictions. They will be agreeable to have the comma to all these sentences having this prohibition, these limitations as way provided by law.
What's the importance of a comma?
Because right now it's fixed. You cannot change the 60-40, for example, that the Constitution fixed for investments in public utilities, for example. The foreign investments can only be 40%. It can be 41, 42. It cannot be, because that is where there is a fixed constitutional provision.
Okay.
By putting a comma as may be provided by law.
So wait a minute. Sorry, Rufus. No, it just dawned upon me that by putting a 60-40 fix,
Yes.
we've literally, the framers of the Constitution literally
Fixes it, yes.
any foreign, the amount of foreign investment coming. So any aspiration of economists and government,
yes.
oh, we want more, we want more.
Investment, no, nothing.
I almost
Nothing
said
doing.
tough S. I almost said, tough S. Because, you put it in your
It is right
constitution, so live with it.
Yes, that is why we are
But
trying.
for 84 years.
Yeah, 84 years.
84 years.
So that is why we are trying to have this amendment, economic chacha, so that Congress will determine, for example, in public utilities, why not open it, for example, to foreign investments to 100% or 80%. So that is what we have. And because really, we want to have to compete in the international community, the investors, to come to our country and invest here because now they will have some sort of control. At 60-40, foreigners will be giving 40%. They have no control because 60% will be Filipinos. And, the foreign investors want to have some control because that is their business. They want to have that. And that is why we are proposing this. And MAP is in favor, the Management Association of the Philippines, as you have said. These provisions were to protect Filipino businessmen.
Okay, now...
But they are saying, no, we don't want protection.
Okay, the map says we don't want protection.
We want to open
We want investment.
Yes.
Okay, now here's the other question, which is why I was saying, John, earlier, that we need to explain these things clearer. When you say the constitutional provision on economics was crafted to protect local business, how many Filipinos are we talking about? Because, it's always been said that the Philippine economy is controlled by 100 families.
That's correct. Who are we protecting? Well, the big businessmen, the big families, that is precise, who are really much in business. But they themselves, Makati Business Club, this is a primary organization of businessmen, Filipino businessmen, especially. They are saying also, they are in favor of lifting the foreign limitation. Because they probably they see that if we lift them, there'll be more foreign investments, there will be more jobs given, more income to our people. They can buy, they will have higher purchasing power and buy from them.
That's
their
our
own products.
That's our presumption.
Yes.
What is the response of the foreign chambers and its members?
Well, I think, I think these local large companies can compete. And you have to also consider the benefits of competition. We really are about the 107 million Filipinos who need better infrastructure, better services, and the like. You have dominant companies already. If you allow more to come in, you'll lower the prices, improve the technology, have more competition. That's to the benefit of virtually all Filipinos. And I don't think that the large companies will suffer as a result. By the way, the large companies are investing abroad. Ayala Infrastructure has invested in a wind farm in Vietnam. Large Philippine energy companies have been looking at geothermal plants in Indonesia, which is rich in geothermal potential.
If I'm not mistaken, the MVP Group has invested in expressways abroad.
Yes,
San
exactly.
Miguel has invested in fuel chain in Malaysia, etc.
Yes, and that's the vision of the ASEAN Economic Community as well. And there are sectors, as I noted before, in which the Philippine government has agreed to in the vision, but always it's hidden behind these restrictions.
So the big boys in the Philippines are going abroad, allowed to go abroad, but the big boy, well, not necessarily the big boys, the Constitution of the Philippines protects the big boys and prohibits the foreign companies from investing.
I'll give you an example quickly. When Malaysia, Myanmar, I'm sorry, I correct myself, I used to call it Burma, Myanmar opened up a few years ago, their telecommunications were from the last century. So they opened it up and they brought in a Norwegian and a Dubai company, and now their broadband service is better than the Philippines.
Okay, we'll go for a break, and when we return, more discussion about foreign investments and economic chacha or constitutional reforms regarding economics when Agenda returns.
The country's investment climate has improved, but investors continue to face various restrictions. That's according to a report by the U.S. State Department, which includes caps on foreign ownership as among challenges faced by outsiders. In its 2019 Invest Climate Statement for the Philippines, Washington blames Manila's quote-unquote protectionist constitution. It said, this limits foreign ownership in several sectors of the economy and thus constraining investments. Recall that the country's charter bars foreigners from owning mass media companies. It also limits foreign ownership of public utilities to 40%. In 2018, President Duterte signed an executive order on the new Foreign Investment Negative List, or FINL, the newest touted sectors where restrictions have eased. Although business leaders said the new FINL bore but modest gains. And since several prohibitions call for legislative action, foreign ownership caps cannot all be lifted administratively.
We should add to that the statement of the Chinese ambassador responding to Teddy Boy Locsin saying, don't blame us if nothing's happening. It's your system and your government that's so complicated and difficult to deal with. Now, the question here, Congressman Rodriguez, is this. Yes, you have noble intent. There is support for the intention, but most people will say you can't mess with the Constitution. It just takes an entire nation to go to the polls to change the Constitution. How are you going to do this?
The Constitution is never static. It adapts to the times.
Okay.
And that is why a Constitution could be amended and revised. And that's precisely provided in our Constitution. The revision, amendment, because times would change.
Okay.
Now, this is an era where every country, especially in Asia, are trying to get foreign investments in their shores.
Okay.
Why? Because precisely with foreign investments, it will provide more jobs to the country's young people, like in the Philippines, and then more income through taxes to the government. And that is why there is about time, because it's already 80 years old, that we had this protectionist since 1935.
Yeah.
There has been a protection of Filipino of this listed limited foreign investment in fields like public utility, developing natural resources, media,
So
and all of
let's
this.
protected.
They're all
Protected
protected.
industries.
There's a maximum stated in the Constitution. Other constitutions in most countries do not have these kinds of restrictions in the Constitution itself, because you cannot just change the Constitution. It has a very, very rigid process of amendment.
Yeah.
That is why we are saying that we should now amend them so that we will allow Congress to determine which areas should now be open for more foreign investments.
How do you go about that? I mean, is it public outcry, media, a call of votes in Congress? Because every time you hear the word cha-cha or reform,
Yes.
they say, oh, the president wants a term extension. Oh, the congressman wants term extension. And you're actually one of the guys who's talking about term extension. So people are saying, okay, here comes the sneaky again.
No, in the political amendments, because these are the economic amendments now. The political amendments, one that I propose is just an additional 1 year to the 3-year terms of local officials, governors, mayors, and congressmen. Because 3 years, Cito, and you would agree with that, and most of our resource persons in our hearings, because we already had 60 guests for the past 2 sessions, and another 30 guests this morning.
Yeah.
So they are saying that, yes, 3 years really is very, very short to be able to have the officials perform their duties and finish their programs. So a 1 year increase in the term.
But can't you do this thing separately? Okay, you're going to be a congressman for the next 3 years. Okay, so for 2018 to 2019, let's do economic revisions first.
Well, we believe that it's also timely that we will have this increase of 1 year, but it will not be effective for this Congress.
Yeah.
It will be self-serving.
Yeah,
so it will be in the next Congress.
I trust you enough.
Yes, yeah.
I don't call you comrade for nothing.
Comrade,
okay? No, but my concern
Yeah,
is,
just to
John,
concentrate.
please jump in. You know, people say, can we just focus one thing at a time? Because we support the charter change. What's your position? Because, John, you've heard this discussion for what, the last 2 decades?
I think at the American Chamber and the foreign chambers, we don't really want to comment on political issues, although I come from a country that's a federal republic, and we can deal with the complications of that, and we have no term limits in our Congress. But really, I think if you, this has been proposed before. In 2013, there was a resolution that almost passed the House, and the Senate was prepared to take it up as well. So if that had been successful in in that Congress, it would have been voted on in the elections in 2016, and the Constitution would be changed. The chairman has talked about the language unless otherwise provided by law, which is actually in the Constitution with respect to the practice of professions.
Okay.
And there are 46 laws on professions, and 45 of them are open with reciprocity. Only one, X-ray technology and radiology, still reserves that to Filipinos. So that's the principle being proposed here. The foreign chambers in their position paper in the hearing of the Chairman's Committee last Wednesday, as well as the Foundation of Economic Freedom, of which I happen to be a fellow, but what we call the two Garys, Gary Oliver and Gary Tevis, who had served under PGMA's administration, and had done a study that was presented to the last Congress, which really recommends not even having that unless otherwise provided by law, which is an alternative way of doing it because you can make the changes faster that way. So it's not like the Public Services Act of 1936 is still in. When the 35 Constitution was adopted, there were 14 million Filipinos. When the 72 Constitution was adopted, there were 40 million Filipinos. When the 87, it was about still half of what there is today. So the world has changed from those periods of time, and these reforms are catching up with the competition in order to create more competition here, more investment here, more jobs as well.
Okay.
Now, how do you sell it? I hope the government can sell it. I hope the Congress can sell it. It's not. We are the investors. We don't have to sell it.
You use the word sell it, okay? I think it's not the selling that's a problem here. It's the product. I now ask you, as a media person, if you were going to change that economic or provision in the Constitution, how would it be written by Rufus Rodriguez?
Well, I have proposed really that in these sentences in the Constitution, where there is a foreign limitation of 40%, 30%, or even 100% out for the foreign investments, I am for the provision of putting up a comma that as may be provided by law, meaning Congress can now invite all the sectors, the NEDA, the government, so that if we believe that it's about time that for public utilities we should have 100% foreign ownership, or in the development natural resources, foreign 100%, or mass media and so forth, then we will have a law for that. Right now we cannot. The Ramos opening up in the negative list can only pertain to those sectors or businesses that are not mentioned in the Constitution.
On the list. So
yes,
those specifically mentioned in the
Constitution, zero. You cannot be higher.
You will say, you will add the word as provided by law.
As may provided by law.
Which will now allow Congress to come up with laws that are adapted to the environment or the business.
That's correct.
Okay.
I mean, there are other restrictions. If you look at the foreign investment negative list, there are restrictions on manufacturing fireworks. There are restrictions on private security agencies. There are restrictions on job placement agencies. These are all under law.
I find that
They're all
weird.
under laws.
I find that weird what John is saying, because like manufacturing of fireworks, the fireworks industry is dying. the ban on X-ray technicians working in the Philippines. All our X-ray technicians are leaving the country because they get better pay in America.
They get well paid in America.
Yeah.
Yes.
So this should really be opened up. As long as you do not have it in the Constitution, then I believe these laws that should open them up should be there and should really prevail. But the problem really are those mentioned in the Constitution, which we're now trying to address, Cito.
Okay. Now, how would you go about it? Because that's where you and I argue. You want to do everything, one time, big time. But
no, not really.
But no, you want to do the economic reform, the change, inclusion of that clause. You want to do the term limit extension by 1 year, and there's another thing that you wanted to do.
The Senate. We will elect them by region.
By region.
That's the clamor of most regions, because most of the regions of our country do not have representatives.
So instead of the 12 senators that we have,
24,
24, we're going to have.
We have 9 times 3 each is 27. Just
27.
an additional, 27. So that right now, you see that in our Senate, many regions are not represented. Like Eastern Visayas, some are Leyte.
But
our Muslim brothers are not in Congress.
Yeah, but that's exactly the point. Okay, all your arguments are valid, but it never happens because political suspicion and political agendas become suspect. So why not? As far as you are concerned, what is the most important and beneficial to the Philippines? Should it be the economic loss or the term extension or the 27 senators?
I believe it is both, because while we are able to free our economy, make it more open to the economic chacha, we must be able also to have a good representation in our legislature. And that people, that in America, for example, they have 50 states. Now, the congressmen there, the House of Representatives, depends on the population. California has more than 40 congressmen, and New York. And then for the Senate in America, 50 states, biggest state of California, New York, they have 2. Maine, Vermont, small, they have also 2. That will equalize it. That's why our region should be equalized. There should be equalization of regions by having their representatives. That's why there's lack of development in Samar Leyte, in Region 9, is in Western Mindanao, our armed region, because they're not represented in the highest legislative body in the Senate. So I believe that this can go. What we have put in the back burner first is the federal system. That's a big debate.
That died 6 months ago.
It's still there.
Yeah, you wish.
But it's still there. I filed 2 resolutions. One is for these 3, which are quite doable at this time. Federalism could be discussed at some other time.
Okay.
But it is still there because we in Mindanao wish to have federalism.
We'll go for a quick break. When we come back, John, you'll get the turn. Okay, I told you, jump in, but you don't want to jump in.
The break
Agenda will be back after this short break.
The horizons may be wider for job seekers in the country if lawmakers agree to amend the almost 3-decade-old Foreign Investments Act. 2 separate but similar bills in both chambers of Congress seek to allow foreigners to practice their profession in the Philippines. House Committee on Economic Affairs Chairman Sharon Garin says the amendment would boost the competitiveness of the country's human resource. House Bill 300 also seeks to lower the minimum employment requirement to 15 from 50, direct local hires for small and medium-sized businesses by foreign investors. Proponents of these bills are optimistic that it will finally reach President Rodrigo Duterte's desk. As Secretary to the Cabinet Carlo Nograles says, the FIA is among priority measures of the Cabinet's Economic Development Cluster.
Okay, the chair recognizes John Forbes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, from what I've just heard, they're talking about opening up professions. The fact of the matter is, they've been open up for years. If you go through each of the 45, 46 bills, I lose track of the numbers, with the exception of law, which is controlled by the Supreme Court, which is currently limited to Philippine nationals. They are, with the exception, as I said earlier, of radiology, open to under foreign reciprocity. So Filipinos can practice in the United States. We're fairly reciprocal, maybe not in Japan, although there are provisions in the JPEPA. But you have to, a foreigner that wants to practice here has to apply to the PRC. And there are panels within the PRC of Philippine professionals that will set the standards for practicing here. Now, you could have it more open. You can argue that a rapidly developing economy like the Philippines needs more foreign professionals to come. You could look at Malaysia, which is quite open. So you'll get a foreign professional will come, he'll start up a practice in KL, he'll bring in new technology, he'll begin to hire people, et cetera, et cetera. If you ask NEDA will tell you there are areas where the Philippines lacks professionals and types of geologists. They're all working on offshore oil platforms or in mines abroad. So if you open it up, you can. It is open, is my point, and in the economic provisions, reforms of the committee in the House, you would just keep that language, although, as I said earlier, the FEF and the JFC would just drop the restriction. They just take it out, and all the laws are there in this general principle. So why keep restrictions in the Constitution when you have a mechanism in the Congress and with laws to deal with all the other sectors, whether it's the Foreign Investment Act for domestic manufacturing, export, etc. It's highly restrictive, and the time to reform it is now.
Yes, I agree that precisely there has to be the lifting of foreign investments restriction, but we believe that just to really just remove it will not be, will need really consultation as far as Congress is concerned. That's why we are still proposing that there should be a comma. The restrictions are there so that there is already a leeway for the legislature upon consultation with each sector and our government and the private sector on what should be the increase in this foreign investment. So we are still on that comma as being provided by law.
Okay, there's a view, Congressman Rodriguez, that things like this can actually be, circumvented by acts of Congress indirectly. And I think there have been such moves where, yes, it's in the Constitution, but certain laws were passed to kind of accommodate or give a loophole or an open door. Can't Congress simply come up with new laws and bypass those things?
We cannot, because we are governed by the Constitution. Our laws are supposed to be in consonance and compliant with the Constitution. Once you, for example, for public utility, you open up from 40 to 40 plus, then you directly violate the Constitution. That's
and
why
anybody can go to court.
Yes, and
raise
you
hell.
Very clear. It's very clear provision. It's strictly 60-40, for example, public utilities. So therefore, we are saying that these are the areas which the legislature and the president could not touch.
Okay.
So therefore, it has to be an amendment to the Constitution to allow Congress to be able to determine how to increase foreign investment in this country.
Who's the noisiest as far as the foreign investors are concerned who are knocking at your door saying, Congress, you got to open it up? What industries?
We have John Forbes, the joint foreign chambers, definitely.
No, but I mean, is it the mining sector? Is it media? Because some people are saying, yeah, you can open it up and then nobody comes. What happens then?
It's a general thing. The Makati Business Club, composed of so different kinds of business, are in favor. The same is the with the same with the Management Association of the Philippines, even PCCI.
Yeah.
All of these organizations, Filipino business,
Yeah.
have supported this economic cha-cha.
John,
Yeah, I just
specifics.
Well, I was going to point out that in 1999 there was a presidential commission, and in 2005 another presidential commission under President Estrada and President PGMA that made recommendations that are very much along the lines of what we're discussing today.
Okay.
But I would think...
But who would make a beeline for the Philippines?
Well, most people are not making a beeline for the Philippines because they're told they're not allowed to invest in here. So when you're having a party, you have to send out an invitation.
Okay.
Right? The people are not at the party, so if you want them to come at the party and have more competition and more investment, more jobs, make the sectors more vibrant, then you have to make the changes. It's a complicated process simply because they're in the Constitution. It's much easier to change the laws. And there's by the way, on changing the laws, I would note that there's an excellent bill that is going through the Congress as well, on the Foreign Investment Act. Earlier, the question about the professionals is in the Foreign Investment Act, passed on third reading in the House. But over in the Senate, there's an expanded version of that, which has in it a requirement that NEDA would send April of every year a cost-benefit analysis of the good and the bad about each of these restrictions, such as the one on fireworks, right? Manufacturing fireworks. NEDA would send a report. Do we need to keep this law or not keep this law? That's a very sensible way of doing it. Then Congress can consider, do we need to repeal the law?
Yeah.
Because legislators like my friend Rufus Rodriguez would prefer to pass new laws. Repealing old laws is not as sexy as passing a new law. But you do have to review the laws, and it's an easier mechanism to do it under the Foreign Investment Act than changing the Constitution.
Okay, Comrade Rufus,
Comrade Cito.
Einstein said, okay, doing something the same way over and over again and expecting a different result is a definition of insanity.
That's correct.
You, again, are trying to push for this charter change with the economic charter, the term limit extension, and the added 27 senators. I mean, people would say you're insane. Can't you just be can't you give us proof of integrity by just to show you that we're sincere, we'll do one at a time. This muna, ito lang muna.
That will be decided by the committee.
Okay.
We have a 55-member committee, and precisely, I have proposed for these 3 amendments, including the political to the economic. It is also possible that only the economic provisions first, and then send it to the Senate and for their approval, because we will have a 3/4 vote in the plenary, and the Senate also 3/4 vote. So this is amendment by legislation.
Okay, now if you do that, will it be a congressional action, the Congress and the Senate voting together, or a constitutional convention? Because, John, in the United States, I know each state can actually vote on a referendum. They call for a referendum. It's not necessarily during the elections, correct?
They can do it any time. But generally for efficiency,
Yeah.
it's less expensive to do it during the elections.
Yeah.
And California is the extreme because they have a long list of different things they want the people to guide the
Because you made a
branch on.
comment earlier, which I don't agree with. You commented that you as foreigners avoid making comments or putting in your opinion. But no, seriously, you mentioned something that reminded me and made me realize you have no term limits for congressmen in the United States.
Or senators.
Or senators. I didn't know that. So much so that I think your oldest sitting senator was 90 plus.
It happens.
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah.
So I think this is the perspective that the Philippines needs, because as Congressman Rodriguez pointed out, we're an island. We don't see the whole world. We look inside.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also, it's not politically correct to lift term limits, no. While we add 1 year to local officials and the representatives, because 3 years is just really too short, too many elections, we will make sure that the 3-term limit will be in that particular in our Constitution. It will remain. Because if you lift term limits, once again, people would not like that perpetually family dynasties will continue and so forth. So there has to be a way that there are term limits. So we will stick with that. What we're only saying is that there should be a change because 3 years, we go back, in the 35 Constitution and 71 Constitution, it is 4 years, Cito, you know.
Yeah.
You're too young for that.
No,
but,
no,
your dad would know
that was around. That was around, okay?
Yeah.
Yeah, the congressmen had
4
4-year
years,
terms.
Local officials, mayors. Can you imagine? You win as mayor, you win as governor, you win as congressman. So on the first year, if you're new, you're trying to make your plans to be able to what to do. On the second year, you implement them. On the third year, you're campaigning already, Cito. So very less time for growth and development of the units. So therefore, we are saying it's about time we change this. It has been known, and that is a general consensus of our resource persons who are in favor, who agrees that a 3-year term is too short, really. So we go back to the 35 Constitution, it has been done before, and the 71, where we have a 4-year term for local officials so that they can serve, and then election will come after 4
So
years.
you will call it a term extension, but walang forever.
Well, forever. It is not. It's an additional. It's not really an extension because we're not extending during our time. What we're saying is that we change the Constitution, make it 4 years, not applicable to all of us now in Congress, but it will be applicable on the next election. So in the next election, people will run and they will know it will be 4 years. Mayor of Manila, Mayor of Cagayan de Oro City, the Governor of Misamis Oriental. So they will have 4 years. That is what we're saying. So we need that also now.
You are on your fresh term, right?
Yeah, on
First,
my second,
Is it second
win.
Second win?
Yeah, oh yes, because
Okay,
I had 3 terms straight.
3 terms.
And then 3 years hiatus. And then we have this now as my first year.
So newbie ka na naman.
Newbie na naman
Recycle
tayo.
ka.
Yes.
But I
Okay,
think
John.
you might influence the U.S. Congress because they only have a 2-year term and they spend 1 year.
What do you mean 2-year term?
It's only 2 years. We have elections every 2 years.
For congressmen?
Huh?
No.
No, yes, for the whole Congress, 435 in the House of Representatives.
Yeah.
The Senate is only going to be a third every 2 years.
But the term of congressman is 4 years in the and governors in the United States.
Yeah,
No,
4
no,
years.
no.
4 years.
Congress is, the president is 4 years.
Okay, 4 years.
And we have what we call the off year, when the president and the vice president are not being elected, only a third of the Senate, but the entire House of Representatives is up for re-election.
Yeah.
And they all complain about it because if they're going to be legislators, they should spend more time in Washington, not having to worry about campaigning. So you set an example, maybe we'll follow in the United States. Although
No, but I believe in the United States, your governors are 4 years, except that
Yes,
some
they
are
got-
elected on this
governors
year,
are.
and the others will be 2 years,
Yes,
every 2 years, but different states.
Yeah.
But it's all 4 years.
All 4
All
years.
4 years.
Yeah, okay. Now, before we get Shanghai to politics, go back to these economic reforms. You mentioned earlier the Citira law. We had Congressman Joey Salceda and Congressman Edsel Lagman, both Bicolanos, both coming from Albay, and arguing against each other regarding the pros and cons of Citira.
Yeah.
Now that you're both here, I just want to get your impressions on this, because one guy says, oh, it's going to benefit the businessmen, it's going to be good for them, and the other guy says, baloney, I want to debate. And I don't know what to make of this.
Well, Citira has 2 components. First is about the our corporate taxes.
Okay.
Now, Citira corporate income tax will be reduced from 30% to 20% in 10 years.
Okay.
We agree with that because precisely we want to have we have to have investments here, whether domestic and foreign. It will only be 20% in 10 years' time, not 30%, very high. Other ASEAN countries have lower than that, only 20, some 10%. So we are for that. But the problem here is the other part of the Citira. This is the incentives rationalization.
Okay, take a break, and when we come back, explain that, and it will be our last gap. Okay, agenda will return after a few messages.
Yeah.
Okay, we're on the last gap of agenda. Gentlemen, your views on Citira. Congressman Rodriguez, you were saying that the first half is great because it will lower the corporate income tax and make it level comparative to the ASEAN members. Okay.
Right.
The bad part is...
The bad part is we are going to violate the constitutional provision on obligation of contracts, because when the businessmen came here, they were given 8 years, 6 to 8 years of income tax holiday and a 5% gross taxation of income gross. Now, Citira would like to immediately implement that, and then therefore they are going to limit the years already, even if we have already given 8 years to our foreign investors coming here. That will be a violation of our commitment to our foreign investors who invested them because of this tax holiday. Now, on the 5% gross taxation also, they came because this is a fixed 5% as long as they have their investments here. What should have been done is it should be prospective, so that those already here counting on the commitment of the government would not be, realize that we follow our commitment. The state should be, their obligations should be respected. But in this case, Citira will now cut all of these benefits to the businessmen already here. PESA will be affected. They are now having exit plans to go out because, imagine, they have been promised 5% gross taxation. It will be now changed. And then also the income tax holiday. That is not good for us. It will cost so much transfer of foreign investments in this country.
Okay. John, real life story regarding the impact of Citira or potential impact of Citira to your members.
Well, I've been going to the Congress for 15 years on this issue, and DTI and DOF have never come into full agreement. But we fully support the rationalization of fiscal incentives, because you're talking about 50 or 60 laws that have spread them around. It should be a common platform. So the debate's over the common platform. On the CIT, yes, bring it down from 30%. India recently implemented immediately a reduction from 30 to 22%. And after he was reelected, the president of Indonesia announced that Indonesia would reduce theirs from 25 down to 20% over about 4 years. So we think that the Philippines should not be so conservative and reduce that down to 20% over 10 years, but to do it faster. In the past, when they've reduced it, they've had a little dip in revenue, and then it's recovered. So that's the CIT part of it.
Okay.
The other part of it, there are approximately 4,000 companies that have come in. These are in addition to the ones that are already here. We have American Chamber members here for 100 years. They're paying the 30%, they're fine. But the country has brought into Subic and Clark and the PESA zones thousands of companies, 4,000 of companies. The BPO industry, semiconductor, electronic industry, still the remaining garment industry. And the RHQs are somewhat different, but they have a 10% tax.
Regional headquarters.
So there are 2 million direct jobs in these 4 industries. And to change the rules, ever since the proposal was first launched in December of 2017, has created uncertainty. So there's been a reduction in applications to PESA, both in IT and manufacturing. There's a stalling of the expansion of the BPO industry, and there have been some lost large investments in the electronics industry because of uncertainty. So I think we have a consensus between the investors, DTI, DOF, about resolving this so we can move on and take advantage of things like the rearrangement of logistic chains out of China, which is happening rapidly. That's going to keep on going on. But Vietnam is benefiting, Malaysia is benefiting, Thailand's benefiting, and we're not. So we have to get either, we'd prefer the continuation, but DOF is strongly against that. So if DOF is not more recognizing what the congressman has just explained, then we should move on to a compromise that may have a higher GIE, more revenue, but a long transition period of 10 years so that these companies can adjust slowly Otherwise, there will be serious job losses.
Okay, well, that's a wrap for the day, gentlemen. Thank you very much for being our lecturers and our mentors this morning. Thank you, Congressman Rufus.
Thank you, Cito.
Thank you,
Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
You're very welcome, Cito.
And that was your first look at the day's agenda. I would wrap it up with a simple example. I went to a bus company, and they had great buses. I loved the buses. I loved the trip. But I hated the bus terminal. And then I realized the reason the bus terminal was so grotty, so undeveloped, was because the company felt, why will we invest if we don't know if they're going to demolish us or not? There is a need for predictability and commitment in business and governance. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook and Twitter at One News PH. I'm Cito Beltran. We are One News.